wonderful Michigan expert. She is going to take today because I am double JCI Global Advocacy, which has come up last at training. So Anna's today, and then if you message delivery.
Director Neil, excuse me.
Yes.
I think your voice is clearer earlier than now. It's getting a little bit choppy.
Yeah, your line is muffled.
How about
Still no. Earlier, before you talked to Alexa, your voice was much clearer.
how about now?
Okay, can you say that again?
How about
Your line is still breaking.
I've switched three sets of speakers. I've changed 3 times. Next. Now.
Excuse me, I quite understand what you're saying because the connection is choppy.
Yes, thank you for your feedback. Handing over
Connection is still not so great. I'm so
Hey Neil,
sorry.
I'm not hearing you, Neil, clearly. And the Google form is not opening up properly. I don't know if that's on my end or if everyone is experiencing that.
I posted the Google form link again, so
it's still coming up the same way.
Okay.
I was able to access the Google form.
You're able to get it? Okay.
Yes. I already sent my answers. From my end, I was able to access the Google form.
Okay. And are you guys able to hear me clearly?
Yes, Anna.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
so awesome. Sorry, Neil. Not sure what's causing the audio issues for you, but we appreciate you getting us kicked off. So as we get the training going today, a few housekeeping things to just make sure you know. We will take us a few days here at JCI USA to get the training closed out so you can get the test. But by the end of the week, you will get an email and that will have the slides and presentation materials from the course today, as well as the video of this training session. So you'll be able to review that again, and then you'll be able to take the test, and you'll also be able to rate me as a trainer. So please have a little patience with us. Tomorrow we do have the 3rd and 4th effective communications trainings going on. And then we'll need a few days to get everything wrapped up from the whole weekend. So if you don't see something by the end of the week though, please feel free to reach out to myself or reach out to Neil, and we'll be more than happy to get any questions you have answered and get you assisted. So I do want to take a moment to let you know as well that I am working off of multiple monitors today to facilitate the training. So if you're watching me on the Zoom camera and you see me looking awkwardly up at the sky or something, I promise I'm not trying to ignore you. You guys are actually all like up here for me, and then the slides are over here. And so I just want to make sure that I'm getting all the information I need from the screens. So I promise I'm not trying to like look awkwardly and ignore looking at you. If you see me looking this way, I'm actually looking at where you all are. So thanks for that. And as Neil mentioned, I am have a pretty high expertise in communications. I actually have a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University in communications. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. And this year for my state organization, I'm serving as the Communications and Technology Director. So I'm managing all of the aspects of the social media, the written newsletter communications, and all of our technology things for the state. So here in the US, we have between our LOMs, we have our state organization and then the national organization. So we just kind of have that extra layer. And so I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. I thank you all for sharing in the chat, how long you've been a member and where you're coming from. And I've been a member for 10 years in JCI. I'm a member in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where I live. And also a member in Lansing, which is our state capital, and I work there. So I've been around for a little bit, and I really enjoy being able to share with all of you trainings like we're doing today. I think that one of the most amazing things about being a member of JCI is that global connection that we have. And I'm especially happy to see that we're making the most of it during this pandemic, to be able to have these online training courses and facilitate learning together with members from all over the world. So thanks for taking a little time to join us today. It's 3 p.m. here for me in Michigan. I know for some of you, it's the middle of the night. So I appreciate you really adjusting your schedules to be here and learn with us. And so we will get going. So I promise I'm going to try to make this as quick and efficient as possible today. This particular module has some group work that is really, I found difficult to facilitate over the digital training atmosphere. So we are going to skip some of the group activities. When you get the slides though, you'll see all of that information in there. So you'll have that available. And if you have any questions about those activities or anything, please feel free to let me know. You can reach me anytime, and I'm happy to answer them. But it's just, unfortunately, some of the digital aspect makes it a little hard for group work sometimes. So with that, we will get started here on our next session with crafting your message. Welcome back to those who joined me a little earlier on the first session as we built our foundation. And so we are going to start out by learning about our objective. So we all learned in building our foundation that it's important to make sure that we tell people what we want them to remember. So we're going to start right out with that. So our objective today is to make sure that we become familiar with the tools for planning, creating, and giving high impact presentations that effectively communicate presenters' message. So our agenda for the training is we're going to talk about defining a high impact presentation, look at the key presentation features and elements, talk a little bit about no-nos. So what do we avoid so that we don't have a bad presentation? The important presentation principles, the planning process of a presentation, and then we're going to finish up with the structure of a presentation. So as we go through these modules, if you have questions, please feel free to ask at any time. And I will probably ask you some questions along the way as well. And so I look forward to that interaction that we'll be able to have. I'm going to try to monitor the chat, but I'll be honest, it's a little hard. So it's more helpful to me if you do have a question that you unmute and ask it aloud. So participating that way is a lot easier for me to manage as your trainer than if we tried to manage the communication through the chat. So let's hop right on into defining a high impact presentation. So before we start talking about this, I want you to just take a moment and think about a presentation that you have seen in the past that just really stands out to you. Like, wow, it was impressive. Like you're remembering it now. So clearly it made some sort of impact on you. And as we go through the training, I want you to keep thinking about that presentation and see if you notice things that come up in the skills we're learning that you can identify as like, oh, that was definitely in that presentation. So a high impact presentation shows us information that comes from data and facts, and it shows it in a way that captures our attention, gets the audience interested, and makes sure that we retain the message. So we previously learned that we're going to remember things that matter to us. And so making sure that we're catching the audience's attention and, you know, explaining like why it matters, what is the importance, will definitely help them retain the message.
Sorry, and your screen, I think you should share your screen.
Oh, thank you. Can you guys see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome.
All right.
Sorry about that. I get so excited to share the material that I forget sometimes that I'm not sharing my screen. So thank you very much for pointing that out. So there we go. A great example of how making sure we are giving high impact in our presentation by having those that information presented in a way that you can visually see it as well. And those who were on with me in the last training will know it's also helpful if you see people sitting in the waiting room and I'm not admitting them, like tell me that there's somebody in the waiting room, because I don't always see that pop up either. So we're off to a great start. You guys are awesome. I'm excited to train you today.
Anna, this is James. Do you want to make me co-host and I can help you watch the waiting room?
Yes. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
Done. All right. So next up, we're going to look at key presentation features and elements. So audience. Audiences are targeted spectators. They have a need and an interest in the information being given in the presentation. So in today, our training, you all are the audience. And I hope that you have an interest in what's being presented. And next up, we have our information. So this is the set of data, the contents and arguments that define the presented topic. The structure characterizes the objective to be accomplished in the presentation, and the information is best illustrated when resources are used correctly. Having that PowerPoint available for you all to view. Our resources are going to be the articles, equipment, and objects that we use for showing the information. So when resources are novel, they help the presenter have a great impact on the audience. So we want to make sure that we're gathering resources that are really going to help lend to making a high impact. The place. So this element is going to be the setting where the presentation is made. And it's also going to affect the receptiveness of the audience as well as the performance of the presenter when it comes time to show stimulus. So normally when we do these JCI trainings, we're together in a room, a meeting room, a classroom, you know, some type of space where we're physically with each other. And so we've had to adapt during this COVID pandemic time to a virtual environment. And it's a little different. So we're interacting via a computer screen. And while, you know, when you have your camera on, I can see you, I can see your face and your reactions. It's not quite the same as when we're in person, but it is really cool that we have technology like this that helps us facilitate these types of things. And even as we continue on, as things into the future, when things hopefully settle with the pandemic and we go back to more in person, I think we're going to continue to see quite a bit of this virtual element stay around for a while. So it's really good opportunities for us to have experience with this type of place. And you don't necessarily think about the virtual environment as a place because we think of it as more of a physical, like a location, but it really is. It, you know, through Zoom or Teams or any like Google Hangouts, you know, any of the many different opportunities there are for a digital room of sorts. The next thing to look at in our features and elements is going to be the stimulus. So that's the message, the invitation or reflection that connects the presented information with the interests and motivations of the audience. So how are we going to get our audience to really take in that message and that information? And then we finish up our pie here with the presenter. So the person who's responsible for mastering the contents of the presentation and communicating that information, data, and arguments to the audience. So that would be me for all of you today. So the next phase we're going to come into for crafting our message is to look at the gathering of information. So in order to prepare a presentation, we have to document and research information that we're going to use. So we have to be clear in the scope of our presentation so we can make sure we don't include unnecessary information that's going to just overload the audience. So this kind of ties into those 3 C's when we think about concise. So we want to define the presentation objectives. Use the objectives to choose the most appropriate criteria and information. Those can be really important to make sure that we don't end up with scope creep, where we, you know, maybe I want to start giving you a presentation about how to snuggle cats. And then as the presentation goes on, we get into like 10 million other things about cats. Well, the presentation is really just about snuggling cats. I really like cats. So we want to make sure that we collect all information possible. So study and make notes on the criteria and information that's going to be discussed, and gather information from as many resources as you can. Choose content and data that's related to the subject. So eliminate information that's not relevant to your subject matter, and it helps to make sure that you have better communication on the message, especially if you are going to be providing handouts of any type with your presentation. So if I want to give you a presentation on snuggling cats and all of a sudden I start talking about giving dogs a bath, that's totally unrelated and wouldn't make any sense why I was doing that in the presentation. Make sure to organize your content. So develop a logical sequence that's going to facilitate an understandable approach. Sometimes it can be helpful as you're doing organization of your content to maybe use some of the brainstorming techniques like storyboarding or mapping to just kind of get, you know, here's all the different content and how am I going to arrange it so that it makes sense logically. Use number themes and sub-themes. This shows raw content in different detailed and identifiable levels. So think of it kind of like when you're looking through like the table of contents on a book. You're going to have information about, like, you know, these are the chapters, and then maybe there's sub chapters within, and so then they're kind of laid out. So it really ties into the organization by using those themes and sub themes. When you're structuring your presentation and you're gathering that information, use the 3 umbrella ideas as a way to help you set up your points and subpoints. So under this concept, you're going to create your content based off of 3 basic points and then position all of the other relevant information under these points. So start creating your sub-themes. Use filters several times. go through your presentation, research, and filter out any long definitions, any examples that you've already talked about, and any unnecessary explanations. Again, this really ties back into that concise. So we want to make sure that we're not just adding a bunch of information because we think it makes us sound smarter, when really all it's doing is clouding the information that we're trying to present and make sure that the receiver gets and understands. And then kind of lastly, focus on graphics. So when you're putting together a presentation that lasts between 10 and 30 minutes, it's a good idea to use a few graphics as part of that. Information may not be easily digested by the audience if all you do is put up slide after slide of words. So having some kind of graphics that help to convey the message, and especially if you have important items that you really want people to remember, that graphic will really help because it adds that extra element of impact to the presentation. So next up, we are going to look at designing our presentation. So this one kind of focuses a little bit on designing a slide presentation, like a PowerPoint or other similar type of slide presentation. So as we go through, we'll be able to see some of the examples of these things in this training presentation. It's important to have flexibility when you're preparing your slides, but don't exaggerate text, images, and colors. So when you're doing your presentation design, provide an outline. So at the beginning of ours, we talked about, these are the different things we're going to cover. So I gave you an outline of what this training covers right from the beginning. Make sure you have uniformity in your images. So it's really helpful, especially in PowerPoint, to use a template. Make sure that you've got uniform colorings and fonts and image sizes and things of that nature through the presentation. If every slide you go to just is completely different visually, your audience will be so focused on just trying to figure out what is on the slide that they will completely miss the message you're trying to present on. Make sure that you're using fonts that are legible, use text colors that contrast with the slide background, and that really helps for your audience to be able to digest the material. It's really hard so the background of this slide is white. So if I had white text, then you wouldn't see it at all. And if I had like a really light yellow or something, you'd see it, but it'd be really hard. And so you'd be like straining and focusing all of your attention just on trying to figure out what's that yellow blob on the screen. So making sure you have contrast in your colors, and the font that they use here, is pretty easy to read, very legible. There's some really pretty, like scrolly, handwriting looking fonts. They're great for some kind of like artwork, but not for presentations, because you want to make sure that at a glance, your audience is going to be able to look at your presentation and digest the material quickly. So legibility, they really stress this one, and it's very important to avoid using font colors that make reading your text difficult, avoid using text fonts and sizes that make it difficult to read. If you're going to highlight things, try to use bright colors like fuchsia, yellow. You should avoid darker color highlighter colors like green. Can be sometimes really hard to be able to see what has actually been highlighted. Animations are an important part of the design of your presentation. So especially in PowerPoint, inserting subtle high-speed animations that help transition between activities in the presentation really helps to kind of smooth the progression. You don't want to overly animate your presentation because then it becomes distracting. So you want to make sure you're using quick, fast-paced, high-speed animation. And you should typically avoid sound with animations or transitions unless it really lends to the message that you're trying to convey. But just having a sound for the sake of having a sound is really distracting. Remember that less is more. So don't overload slides with information. Use fewer words, use things like titles, bullet points, short phrases or sentences to get the main point across and distinguish between different subjects. But remember that your audience is there to hear you present information. And so if all you're going to do is put all the information on your slides and then you're just going to read it back to them word for word from the slides, they can read it at home on their own. That's not what they came for. So use the slides to enhance your message, but not be your entire message. Don't forget about the indispensable slides. So your welcome slide at the beginning, a thank you slide at the end. Presentations that cover a broad range of topics may also need to have slides that separate those topics into modules. And each section should have a slide that clearly identifies the beginning and end when there's a new stage, a new phase, or a new module that's being facilitated. And the use of images and video in presentations. So remember that it's commonly said, an image is worth 1,000 words. So incorporate those images that support your message into your presentation, strengthen the message so that you have that additional backup to make sure your audience is really getting it and remembering. Make sure though that your images and photos are high resolution so that you don't have weird pixelation or a loss of quality. A picture is great, but if you can't really see what it is about, then it can be a little frustrating because you're like, okay, this, I think that this is a picture of, Anna snuggling her cat because that's what she's presenting on, but I can't really tell. So then it starts to distract from the message. And if you all want to ever see pictures of me snuggling my cat, follow me on Instagram. So next up, we are going to talk a little bit about what to avoid. So just as important as learning what makes a great impact in our presentations is learning what we should not do so that we don't do those things. So the first one is not having enough information about the topic and overlooking important details. So if you're presenting on something that you are very familiar with, then this is probably not going to be a problem. But if you're presenting on something that's new, a new concept, a new idea, make sure that when you're doing your research that you pull enough information that you can confidently present as an expert on the topic. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the information that your research is going into your presentation, but sometimes it's helpful to have a little bit of it kind of like on hand. So if you do need to pull it out because somebody asked a question or you realize that you need to expand on something to help for understanding and learning purposes, then you have that information available. It's important to avoid rambling. Stating and restating and then continuing to just state the obvious, like, we got that point out there, they got it, move on. And preparing content for only certain people in the audience. So this one is really important to think about. So if I'm going to be giving a presentation at an animal rescue conference, and it's for rescuing animals of all kinds, and so people are all excited, they're coming to my presentation, and all I talk about is rescuing cats, I've targeted a specific group that's in the audience and cut everyone else out. because maybe there's people there who rescue dogs and horses and rabbits and, you know, all other kinds of animals. And so they want information too. So make sure that you're not targeting one specific group of the audience when you have a broad audience of people. It's also important to make sure that what you're discussing in your presentation is about what your audience needs and not about what you want. So if I'm presenting at an animal rescue conference, I rescue cats. I love cats. I do all the cats, all the like cats, everything. But if my audience is asking me to talk about dog rescue, and I'm just like, yeah, dogs that, you know, they need rescue, they're great. Now let's talk about cats. I'm completely ignoring the needs of the audience and I'm just doing what I want. So make sure that you're focusing your discussion on the audience, and having that feedback from them will help you to make sure that you are continuing to present information that meets their needs. It's also important to avoid not showing interest in what the audience is saying back to you, the feedback that they're giving. So if you're standing there and you're giving your presentation, and even if you're talking about what the audience wants to hear, you're meeting their needs in terms of what you're discussing, if they give something back to you, they ask a question or make a comment, and you're just like, yeah, whatever, and kind of dismiss it, that is a presentation no-no. Engage your audience. Another one is using unrelated audio visuals. So if I'm giving a presentation in my local organization about an active citizen framework project, and every other picture that's in my presentation is a picture of me and my family on vacation, I mean, that's cool that I went on vacation with my family, but that's not related at all to the presentation that I'm giving. So make sure that your audiovisual things match your presentation. And then the last big no-no, the thing to avoid, is overloading your presentation with too many resources. So it's great to cite resources, especially, you know, you've just spent all this time doing your research and you put together information from all these different sources, and you want to make sure that you're sharing that with the audience, but don't give them like too much, because then they're just going to shut off and be like, whoa, that I'm done, I'm out, I don't really care where that came from, I don't want to learn more. So if you have something where you're like, wow, I found a ton of great information on this, and I think the audience is really going to want to know more too, and I want to share where I found all that so they can go out and read more on their own as well. Give them like a bibliography, or, you know, like a slide that has some additional resources, but you don't necessarily have to go like line by line and present it. Give them a handout with additional resources, but you know, that makes it easy for them to connect with that, but helps you to make sure that you're not losing your audience. So next up, we are going to talk about presentation principles. So the first one we have here is be convincing. The purpose of every presentation is to persuade. You want to persuade your audience to get on board with your idea, to support your project or your product, to support your concept. You want them to be sold on like, hey, I believe this and you should believe this too. And so be convincing about it. In order to be convincing, your presentation should offer a solution to one of the audience's problems. So in the case of our training today, you as attendees want to increase your skills in communication and learn about crafting your message. So I am going to give you a solution to that by teaching you about these different principles. Make an impact while you're selling your ideas. So make sure that you illustrate your message with different audio visual cues and resources for your audience. And the result of a convincing presentation is the audience's acceptance of your proposed idea. So be concise. concise is so important in communication, all aspects of communication. We're suffering from information overload, and especially right now during the pandemic, because the only thing we have is information just being thrown at us all the time. It is our connection to everything. So presentations that are based on loads of information without concise examples are basically just like a grain of sand in the desert. There's millions and millions and millions of them out there. And so make sure that you're giving concise examples, concise information to your audience. You want your message to have an impact. You want your audience to think, to explore, and to do something, depending on what you're presenting. So create something that motivates them. Information should also be shown in a clear way. Plenty of examples and interactions really helps to keep the listener from distancing themselves from the message. Be impactful. We forget quickly. As we learned in the first module of the Effective Communications courses, we speak at a rate of 150 words a minute, but we hear at a rate of 1,000 words a minute. So we have all this extra time going on in our minds to think about things, to get distracted, to think like, maybe you're listening to a presentation and all of a sudden you're formulating your grocery list because after this presentation's done, you're going to the store, So be impactful so that your audience remembers what you're saying and gets invested in the message. And be balanced. Presentations must have content equilibrium. So everybody has a different learning style. Some of us learn better by doing, some of us learn better by hearing and getting instruction. Some of us need visual aids, and some of us need kind of like a balance of all of that in order to really truly facilitate learning. So make sure that your presentation satisfies 3 basic criteria in that it grabs attention, has memorable meanings, and is dynamic. Spoken language takes on greater meaning when images and music are added. So use those audiovisual elements to enhance your message. So let's go into a little bit of the presentation planning process. So when we are building out our presentation, it's important to remember that it may take several stages to get from the concept and idea of your presentation to the finished product, the presentation that you're ready to give. Presentations need to be structured in an impactful way so that you can encourage your audience to listen, engage, contribute, and achieve the outlined objectives. So we want to make sure that we define our objectives and expected results. So one of the first things we learn in communication is that, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them. So give that outline, give that, that list of, here's what we're going to talk about today. Know your audience and their communication style. Sometimes this is easier than others, but as much as possible before your presentation, try to get some demographic data on your audience. Have an idea of their approximate age. It's helpful if you can know what mix of gender you may have in the audience, marital statuses, cultural backgrounds. If you're speaking to people of a certain profession, kind of understanding a little bit about the demographics of that profession, determine their level of language, jargon, understand, what they understand. So like if I'm speaking to an audience of only JCI members, I can safely use jargon that we all know within the organization. If I'm speaking to a mixed audience of JCI members and community members, then I want to make sure that I'm communicating in a way that the community members don't feel left out, because it seems like I'm only talking to the JCI members with all the jargon and things that are inside for us. Identify what your audience expects. So anticipate questions that they might have and make sure that you have some responses available and ready. Sometimes the process of identifying questions your audience might have can help you to make sure that you're giving a well-rounded presentation. So you may be able to go back through and identify areas of your presentation that you need to kind of buff up a little bit to make sure that you're getting that information out. And develop content and information according to the proposed objectives. So use those objectives as your roadmap. Make sure that you're following it, and so that as you go through and present your content, you can be confident that you're achieving the information as outlined, and that your audience is going to understand and take it in. Reinforce presentations by digging deeper into your key aspects. So this means that you're going to need to explain in more detail your course information through the use of those audiovisual aids. So examples might be graphs, forms, photos, evidence of statistical facts, things that you can add in to just back up the information that you're presenting. Make sure that you design the discourse and impact strategy. So strategically choose where you're using written versus spoken language, the style that you're using, and how the structure impacts the audience. So you want to make sure, especially if something is the most important thing you're presenting in the training, make sure that's the thing you say last, because we've already learned that people remember what they heard last. Prepare your audiovisual aids and supporting materials. So have a list of what you need in order to be successful at giving the presentation. So if your presentation has a PowerPoint, make sure that that the facilitators for the event know that you're going to need access to a laptop and a projector. If you're going to need a clicker, if there's materials such as participant manuals or handouts, if there's stuff that you specifically need as a presenter, if you need chart paper and markers and any of that kind of stuff for your presentation in order for it to be successful, make sure that you have that all laid out in advance of what you need and that you're communicating any of that to your facilitation partners. So, any questions for me up to this point? Or any comments or anything you guys would like to share? All right, who's been thinking about an impactful presentation that they've seen in the past? Something, that obviously it's impactful because you're remembering it. Have you been able to identify any elements from what we've learned so far where you say, oh, yes, in the presentation I saw they did that? Anybody have an example that they could share?
Anna,
Yes.
I want to give an example. I remember one specific presentation. It was actually made of Prezi. Are you familiar with Prezi?
Okay.
Yeah, it had so much impact to me because the way that the presentation was made was really beautiful. The transitions are smooth, and the contents of each, what do you call this, each item are actually just few words, and then it's focused on the larger picture. So that's my one of my most impactful presentations I have experienced in my life.
Yeah, Prezi is a great tool for doing presentations that are definitely animated, visually appealing. So you can have some really phenomenal presentations in that application. It's an online tool, so if any of you haven't experienced Prezi before, you can check it out. I can't remember the website exactly, but I think it's just Prezi, PREZI.com, if I remember correctly. So, but yeah, that's definitely
Yes, correct.
Yep. Okay, great. So thank you so much for sharing that example with us. So now we're going to go into the structure of the presentation. So as we look at the structure of our presentations, we want to think about things in terms of context, diagnosis, forecast, proposal, goals, benefits. So these are going to be the things that help us structure our presentation. So let's dive into each of these elements a little further here. So let's start with context. So context is going to refer to the written or spoken description of a scenario where our project, idea, situation, or statement is described in the presentation to bring understanding. The diagnosis refers to the description of the actual situation in relation to owning or not owning the project. This involves clarifying the need for information, tools, or urgent solutions. Our forecast is going to involve projecting the current situation into the future. So we're going to think about concentrating on the results that justify the implementation of the proposed project or information mentioned in the presentation. Next up is our proposal. So this is going to offer the solution to the diagnosis and avoid the undesirable outlook. This can refer to specific action to respond to the situation described in the outlook. Our goals. This is our expected results from the application decision-making process in favor of the proposal. So this uses facts and data to show the scope of what can be accomplished and contributes to visualizing what will ultimately come of the efforts. And our benefits. So this is going to refer to the advantages or profits that are gained from suggested proposal. Benefits are the main reason why individuals, organizations, and businesses should opt for diagnosing and resolving situations. So as we've gone through these last few elements here, this may sound really familiar, like the active citizen framework and looking at that root cause analysis and things that we learned quite a bit about in JCI. So Shakespeare shared with us that memory, the water of the brain. So once presentations have finished, we want to make sure that we get the attention of everyone in the audience and ensure that they're buying into our presentation, that they have got on board with our idea, that they've learned the information that they came to learn, and that we make sure that we focus on stimulating their memory through associating the things that we want them to remember that are important through the use of those audiovisual aids. So things like an image with books in the brain can help us to remember that memory, the water of the brain, this quote from Shakespeare. And with that, we have completed our second module. This one is a really fast module. And so I really appreciate you all spending some time with me today. So we've learned, quite a bit about making sure that we're going through communication as a two-way process, how to send and receive our messages effectively so we're communicating what we want our audience to hear and ensuring that they're getting the message. And now we've learned more about how to take that communication to the next level with a presentation, making sure that we're appropriately using those audio visual aids. And so now you have the skills you need to take this information and go into your local organizations and enhance those presentation skills. So when you're talking, when you're talking with the board of directors about a project or other members, or you're going into the community to connect with your stakeholders, and now you're going to have like that next level ability to really get the most out of those communications. So I'm going to post in our chat one more Google Doc for the purposes of attendance to make sure you get credit for being here today and that we can get you the information. I know a couple of folks are having some problems with the Google Doc. So if that's the case, you can send me an email at aversale@jcimi.org. And I'll put that in the chat. If you can't get the Google form to work for you at all, but please, if you can get the Google form to work, do that. That's way better than emailing me. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. The Google Doc will be much, much better. But so there's the Google Doc link for the end of course check-in. And tomorrow, Neil will be with you training the third and fourth modules for the effective communication. So you can get all the skills that you need to be the best at communicating, at presenting. And the third one is really cool. Tomorrow you get to learn a lot about the different types of presentations and get to break into groups. So it's a lot more interactive. I'm sorry, this one wasn't super interactive. But thank you again so much for participating today and being with us. And hopefully we'll see you on future JCI USA training offerings. I forgot to mention this to the earlier group, but if you have any interest in JCI trainings in your local organization and you're looking for someone to train them, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to train. I know that for many of you, we're in very, very different time zones. So some of you, it's now almost 4 p.m. for me, and it's like 4 a.m. for some of you. I am totally fine with different time zone stuff, so don't worry about that. If I can help you learn and the members of your chapter learn, I am more than happy to do that. So thanks, everybody. And let's see if we can get a picture before we all hop off. So if you could make sure and turn your cameras on so that we can get everybody. All right, I think we got a few more people popping on here.
My camera's not working right now.
We'll give you a pass, James. All right. Okay. We'll smile and go 1, 2, 3. All right. So I think I got us all in there. So thanks to those who could get their cameras on, and if you couldn't, that's okay. We still at least got your name. So we'll let you all enjoy the rest of your day, get some sleep, have some fun, and I will look forward to seeing you all at future JCI events.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you so much, Anna.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Anna.
See you.